Anderson. Here. Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick.
Fry. Fry. In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
All right, A-Push, maybe that's how the last, 20 videos have gone for you listening to me talk. But hey, there you go. That's from one of the greatest movies of the 1980s, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And the biggest thing is the connection to the Hawley-Smoot tariff. Okay, right here. We're going to talk about that in this section as we talk about the end of the 1920s leading into the Great Depression. All right, first section is the triumph of Herbert Hoover. So Hoover easily wins the election of 1928. We'll look at a map here towards the end. All right, so anyway, a little bit of background. Coolidge could have ran again, but decides not to run for re-election. He was too silent on the issue. Nah. Herbert Hoover runs for the Republicans, and he easily wins in a landslide. Republicans are in charge of the 1920s, so he just dominates this election. And he's kind of a likable story, Herbert Hoover. Very educated, went to Stanford University. He rose up from poverty as a boy. A lot of the rags to riches stories. Give me a person who does that sound like rags to riches. Andrew Carnegie, the Horatio Alger type of story. All right, actually I include the next section first. President Hoover's first moves, and this is such a must-know, the Hawley-Smoot tariff. Highlight this, one of the biggest, most important tariffs in A-Push. And anyone it raised or lower? Anyone, it raised tariffs in the 1930s. Wow, I got a lot here. Look at this. This is just like change over time and continuity. Oh my God, that's why we love history. Fire up. We are almost done. We are in chapter 35, like 7, 8 more chapters. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not. All right. So tariffs. The first tariff began around 1816, especially, was the first tariff to protect manufacturing, and then tariff rates rose. But then the biggest tariff of the antebellum America was the tariff of abominations. And we have a year for that one. Year. It was in what year? Come on, know the year. 1828. Okay, was a tariff of abominations. The South hated it. Farmers hated it. And then over time, the tariffs was reduced rather dramatically in the 1830s, 1840s. Democrats were in charge. And then Lincoln takes over, 1860s. Republicans are in charge. They raised the tariff. Tariffs were relatively high throughout the 1870s, 1880s. But then a big drop in 1912. Woodrow Wilson. What's the name of that tariff of 1913? It's under there. Under the Underwood Tariff, 1913, dropped tariffs dramatically. We replaced that with the 16th Amendment, the Income Tax Amendment. But then in 1930, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff, a must-know, dramatically raised rates. And this was maybe one of the worst decisions our government in America has made. Raising tariff rates decreased trade, which sank us further into the Great Depression. Our next section is about the Great Crash. I would know the date. Most of you know the date. October 29, 1929, the stock market crash. It's called Black Tuesday. And the stock market really over the next 4 years begins to fall. The bottom of the stock market crash was 1932, 1933. That's basically the worst time period of the Depression. The worst year is early 1933. Causes of the stock market crash, the biggest cause is over-speculation on stocks. People thought it was a sure thing, and so they kept buying, driving the prices up. In addition, they were buying on margin. They were buying using borrowed money, which caused the prices to go up dramatically. But eventually, people panic sold around Black Tuesday, and everybody wanted to sell, and the price of the stocks dropped dramatically. So by 1930, again, this is not even the worst of the Depression. 4 million Americans were out of work. Later, 12 million by 1932. Unemployment, we'll get to this later. Write this down. The unemployment rate in 1932 was 25% in America. 1 out of 4 people did not have a job. Highlight this. The banks collapsed dramatically, especially after the stock market crash. Even before in the 1920s, many banks did close, especially rural banks that help farmers. but the banks collapsed even more into the 1930s. So just tragedy, sadness, worst economic time in American history. And it caused suffering, people waiting in line to beg for food in soup kitchens, and also lived in homeless shelters. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. All right, some alliteration. Hooked on the horn of plenty. The Great Depression might have been caused by overabundance of factory and farm products. So I think we'll get to the causes of the Great Depression a little bit, but overproduction again becomes a major cause of a panic or depression. So we were overproducing in the factories and also on the farms, which caused falling prices, which caused struggling factories, and also the farmers could never get out of debt. All right, so our nation's capacity to produce goods had clearly outrun its capacity to consume. Eventually, people stopped buying things because they only needed one refrigerator, one toaster, so people stopped buying things that was caused by overproduction, and the economy just basically became awful because people were getting laid off because nobody was buying anything. Most you know probably from economics, the way to get out of a depression or a recession is to get people to spend their money, and when they have everything they need, they're not going to spend. Also, important to know, Europe was also going through a depression at the same time we are, so it was a worldwide depression, worldwide panic. Ironically, the first two countries really out of the depression, any guesses? In Europe, it was Germany with Adolf Hitler gets out of the depression first, and then in Asia, it is Japan. By the way, if you're hearing unusual noises in the background, that's Miggy gnawing on a bone. Good boy. All right, anyway, the final thing is Hoovervilles highlight this term. This is the makeshift towns where the homeless stayed, and it was terrible. It was shanties. They lived in shacks, and this is where the homeless lived together. And basically, it was to ridicule and to blame President Hoover. And to be fair, Hoover really did not cause this, but people did blame him for the Great Depression. All right, causes of the Great Depression. Again, the biggest two causes are a common theme, and you need to know this in A-Push: overproduction of goods, over-speculation of the stock market. In the past, it's always been over-speculation of land. And so these are always the two biggest causes. In addition, uneven riches. We're big division between the rich and poor. There was mostly poor people in America. Some were rich, but very few, and they had all the money. When the stock market crashes, the rich are going to save their money when the stock market crashes, so they're not going to spend it. The poor really don't have any money to spend, so the economy is going to tank. It's unhealthy to have a big division between the rich and poor, and frankly, in 2014, 2015, we have a big division between the rich and poor right now. It's the biggest gap in American history since 1929, which, scarily enough, is the same year as the stock market crash. So this is an issue even today. Also, people are going into too much debt to buy the consumer goods, and when they lose their job, they can't pay off their debts. They lose everything. And the government also is a cause of it as well. The Hawley-Smoot tariff raised tariffs, which is a bad idea. We got to lower tariffs so people can buy foreign goods, and they can buy our goods. And they also raised interest rates. When you raise interest rates, people are not going to borrow money, they're going to save it. And that was a big cause of it. We needed people to spend their money. Raising rates didn't allow that to happen. And of course, people say the greatest cause of the Great Depression was the stock market crash. You can say it was the biggest cause, but you also can say, and I like to say it this way, the stock market crash was probably the first event of the Great Depression. I've seen this term before, the rugged individualist, and this is what Hoover wanted. He says, we just got to be tough, Americans. We'll get through this. Just be patient. We are tough people. We'll get through it. And so he, of course, gets a lot of the blame for the Depression, but he did not really do much to make people's lives better. Migs? Okay, and so this is why he's criticized so much. He was very hands-off, and so he did not try to make the lives of Americans better. Today, we expect the government to improve our lives. Back in the late 20s, it was very laissez-faire. Hoover is kind of criticized because he did a great job in World War I in helping Europe, feed Europe. He was in charge of that, especially in Belgium. So he's a smart guy. He's very accomplished. But the starving people in America, he did not do much for, and that made a lot of Americans upset with him. He, of course, did not believe in government regulation. He believed in the hands-off policy. But in the end, by 1932, he does start to do more government involvement to help people during the Depression. But some people say it was too late, and he is criticized for not doing enough to get people out of their misery. All right, Hoover, pioneer for the New Deal. Now, please note that Herbert Hoover and the New Deal are not the same. No, this is FDR. But the end of his presidency, his last year, 1932, he does start to become more active. And the New Deal was a very active type of government. So the Hoover Dam does get built, so he does withdraw money to help pay for the Hoover Dam. So this is getting people back to work. It's going to also provide electricity to people out west. And I would highlight this, very important, he establishes a Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. I would know this. I don't have this down, but perhaps you want to write this down, what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was. It was a government agency that was going to give loans to banks. So these banks will loan it out to wealthy people. So the government was going to start pumping money into the economy, loaning it to banks very cheaply, so banks can loan it out to the wealthier people so they can start spending money. So this is a little bit of government involvement in the economy to get people to spend money. Some say it was too little too late, although I think it was rather effective, but people also criticized the RFC because of only helping rich people. Most Americans were starving and poor. Hoover didn't really help them very much. Right, one of Hoover's worst events, besides the stock market crash and pretty much the whole Great Depression, was the bonus army. And maybe you remember this from 10th grade history, but in 1932, many World War I veterans were starving, they were homeless, and they wanted their money that they were promised in 1924 for their service in World War I. Now, these veterans were not going to get their bonus, this money, until 1945, but because of the poverty of the Depression, these veterans wanted it now. So they go to Washington, D.C. in 1932 demanding their money to help end their suffering. So these veterans build unsanitary camps or shacks outside of Washington, a lot like a Hooverville, and they are trying to put pressure on the Senate to allow them to get their money now. Well, riots followed. The troops tried to get them out of here, and the bonus army never gets their money in 1932. I guess it's very important. Hoover says, no, we're not going to give them their money. And the soldiers, troops are called in to disperse the veterans. So basically, you've got veterans fighting veterans in these camps outside of Washington, D.C. Eventually, a couple people died in this incident, and this is just so sad that we were basically killing each other. Veterans were were being killed by soldiers, and it was terrible. The biggest thing is it's bad timing for Hoover. Hoover's one of his worst events, the bonus army. He is criticized for how he handled that, and that made his re-election almost impossible to get in 1932. All right, a couple more slides, little foreign policy. We're not quite to World War II, but we got to talk about the events leading up to it a little bit right now. We're going to talk about 1931 in Japan. And Japan is a problem to the United States, but especially to China. And so 1931, Japan invades Manchuria. Manchuria was a place located in China. So it was a province of China, a lot of valuable minerals. So Japan goes into Manchuria, takes it over so they can get their resources. So Japan has just invaded China in 1931. This violates the open door policy. And what is the American response to the invasion of China, Manchuria? We do nothing. We do not want to get involved in it. It's too much work. We were afraid. And we're in the Great Depression, and we're like, you know what, we can't worry about Japan right now. So Japan was very fortunate. They could invade and take over Manchuria, and America doesn't do anything to stop them. The final slide for today is Hoover, the pioneer of FDR's Good Neighbor policy. Please note in presidential elimination that the Good Neighbor policy was FDR. Do not say Hoover. One of my special students in the past won my class elimination, and in the auditorium against Van Nord's champion, it went like 20-some rounds, a great event. The event was the Good Neighbor policy, and she said Hoover because she remembered this headline, but it's FDR created the new neighbor policy, the Good Neighbor policy. All right, what are we talking about? Basically, the improved relations with Latin America. That is the Good Neighbor policy, and Hoover began that. Before Hoover, conflict in Latin America, the Roosevelt corollary, Taft, Wilson, even Harding and Coolidge had conflict in Latin America, but Hoover, to his credit, does improve the relationship with them. Because of our depression, we were more concerned with our own issues, and we had less money to dominate Latin America. So he was definitely more friendly with Latin American countries. And so Hoover's policies begin the policies of FDR. FDR is considered the greatest ambassador to Latin America. Latin America loved Franklin D. Roosevelt, but it was Hoover who began the policy of being nice to them, friendly, not trying to dominate them so much.